In the late 1970s and the early 1980s, leaders formed a group called the Lehigh Valley Christian Fellowship. That group of people were united in the fact that they had experienced the baptism in the Holy Spirit. At that time, there was a perceived need for a college-age kind of ministry. They asked Trish and I to do that, and we prayed about it and acceded and began to have Friday evening meetings in our home.
We would hear God's direction and move according to God's direction. And that was very exciting to the students that were coming from different colleges to our meeting, because they would move upon what they were hearing from God.
It was kind of like when they were filled with the Holy Spirit and would go back into their churches and found that none of what they could do on Friday night could they do at any time in the churches they were going back to. Trish and I decided that this was counterproductive. We prayed for a long time and decided to shut the meeting down. About a year passed, leaders in the Lehigh Valley Christian Fellowship decided that they wanted to develop an expression of church that at that time really didn't exist in the Lehigh Valley. It was a charismatic church, and then shortly thereafter invited me to become the first full-time minister. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, I'll do it for a couple of years and, and then I'm out of here.
When we had the college group, and then God said, and the college group, which just didn't seem wise to us. We couldn't understand what would happen then. When God called that forth, I had to be honest in saying it's like something so out of our wheelhouse. We didn't anticipate ever doing something like that. And so for me, I laid on my kitchen floor and I was crying. And I said, God, you can't be asking us to do this. We don't know what we're doing. It was more that fear that you would really mess things up, but yet you had this pull of obedience because you knew God was speaking, that you had to move. That was wonderful.
Yeah. And that's the ultimate.
It began in our living room.
It began in our living room on a Sunday morning with about, 15, 20 people.
15 people.
Shortly thereafter, we transitioned to a place called Kurt's Training Center. It was a cafeteria. And at that point, we called ourselves a Bethlehem Fellowship. That was what we were going to call ourselves. We submitted all the paperwork and we did all these things. And we were due to have an interview with the Internal Revenue Service regarding getting our 501c3, our nonprofit status. We received a notice back from Harrisburg that Bethlehem Fellowship was already taken and we could not use that name. And I had the paperwork in front of me and I was sitting there knowing that this interview was coming up. And so I just wrote down New Covenant Christian Community, thinking we can do it, doing business as kind of change later. And we just never changed. It was so unspiritual. Then we became kind of wanderers. We ended up moving from there to what was then the YWCA. And then from there we went to our venue on Linden Street, grew there.
I feel like that wandering was like our pilgrimage to find our home.
Yeah.
And God kept speaking to us, you need to stay on Moravian soil. That was not Grubby's heart, but that's what God was saying.
And this particular building was all abandoned. It was all closed up and tied up in litigation. And we thought, what's the zoning committee going to say when we say we want to move in here and we want to get it rezoned to be a church, because we assumed it was zoned commercial. Tony checked out the zoning and he said, you're not going to believe this. That block is zoned to be a church way back when, and when they rezoned, they missed this particular property. So we bought it, and here we are. I mean, it was almost historically supernatural, crazy kind of thing.
It was crazy supernatural because the building of all this, the community, the people, building walls and designing, and just so many people putting their love and their heart into making this work and changing it. And then we found out the Moravians' original sanctuary right here down at...
It was a second story
was
sanctuary.
A second story floor sanctuary. I just feel like God has really, really blessed, and we stand on the prayers and the heritage of the Moravians that just laid their lives down and came here as part of a mission to win souls for Christ after the Holy Spirit fell.
And we feel like we're an extension of that legacy. Yeah. God does stuff in crazy ways that you never imagined.